Hope we're all okay. I think it's now 10 o'clock. Welcome to everyone who's joined us for the question and answer session with Tim, the MP for Shoreham and East Worthing, and also Martin Randall, who is Director for the Economy in Adur Worthing Councils. We have over 50 people joining us this morning, which is fantastic, and also some different faces, or well, not faces, but we'll pretend they're faces, from those that joined us when we did a similar thing a month or so ago. Thank you, everyone, for logging in. We've also had a number of questions sent to us in advance. Those have all been passed to Tim and to Martin, so any that aren't covered in the next hour or so, they will get responded to, and we have all your details. If you do have anything to add during the webinar, please use the question and answer box within the function of Zoom. Any of you can also keep an eye on that as we go through, and you can add your thumbs up if you like the question, which will increase what Tim and Martin can see. Gentlemen, I shall pass it over to you. Thank you very much.
Right, Chay, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you to the Chamber for organising this again. I think the way we're going to operate this is I'm fielding a few questions, and then anything that's remotely tricky gets handed straight on to Martin Randall from Adur Council, however relevant that may be. So we've had quite a few questions in advance on a whole range of subjects, and it's good to see a good mix of Chamber members represented here this morning. And I can see a few questions coming in on the chat and the Q&A as well. So I'm going to try and field them as best I can, but bear with me. And there'll be more detailed ones, I'm sure, that we won't have the answers for now, and I'm happy to come back to you and we'll hand the answers back through the Chamber, or if people want to email me directly if the business is in my constituency afterwards, and I'm happy to try and handle those. Perhaps we just give a brief preface just to bring you up to date with where we are and all the business support schemes that that there are. And I think most people are agreed that it's a pretty comprehensive measure of things that the government has come up with. But as at the 19th of May, the job retention scheme now included 8 million jobs are furloughed. Just under 1 million employers have taken advantage of that, and so far claims have exceeded £11 billion. And on the self-employment income support scheme, there's 2 million claims made, valuing £6.1 billion. So quite a lot of money has been paid out, and I think the bounce back loan scheme was particularly welcome, and certainly the feedback I've had from that is the very quick turnaround time has been particularly welcome, and that is functioning well after a lot of criticisms by a lack of urgency by some of the banks on dealing with the bigger loans. But anyway, if people got comments on that, please come back to them. And Martin will perhaps comment on the rate at which the council have dealt with some of the grants available. And again, I think our local councils, their track record is pretty good on this. But Martin, if I come over to you in a minute, but with the first question, you might just want to give some up-to-date figures on that, and also the discretionary fund for which the guidelines have now been announced, and you'll be handing out some money from that in due course. Right, having said that, there's a question from Nick Adams at Rabbit Group, which is quite a long one, but it's actually nothing to do with coronavirus, so we might get that one out of the way. Basically, could Martin and Tim give an update on the current status and future development plans for the former civic community site in Dominion Way? And that's obviously been on the cards for some while and is quite an important area. So Martin, I may as well hand that straight over to you, and if you just want to preface it then with a few updates on how the grant scheme is going.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much, Tim, and good morning, everybody. Sorry I can't see you, and sorry that you can see me. But it's really great to be on the webinar with Tim in these sort of most challenging of times. My job since really sort of the back end of March has been very much about coordinating the council's overall response to COVID-19. I'd just been in hospital for a gallstone exploratory, and I think the decision to appoint me to that role was made whilst I was in hospital, and then of course the hospital became completely repurposed for other things. So, however, you know, it has been an interesting time. I think the council's, you know, responded well. I certainly hope that that's your experience. We've managed to sort of shift about £32 million worth of business grant out the door across Adur and Worthing. And now we're getting to grips with putting some criteria together, as Tim indicated, for the new discretionary fund. Obviously, that's been aimed very much at SMEs in the retail, hospitality and leisure sector up until this point. We hope to launch the discretionary fund probably in the sort of second week of June, and we're making sure that we are doing that in a consistent manner. Consistent firstly with the government guidance that's been announced, but also with our peers and neighbours, you know, across West Sussex and the wider patch. So just going into the specific question. So Mick, great to hear from you, and I'm very impressed you managed to get to the top of the list on the question, so well done there. I think the point of your question relates to the fact that obviously, you know, you have a temporary lease at the moment on Decoy Farm, and we've been more than happy to, you know, to host you there. There's a wider point around getting Decoy Farm, you know, ready for development ready for businesses who may wish to move in the future. You know that this one has been stuck for a while, but you know, in a couple of years ago, we did manage to secure £4.8 million worth of government funding, and we've been using that to analyse and the site and to begin cleaning the site. So obviously, you know, we need that land. That said, you know, it is a large site, as you rightly point out in your question, and you know, I'm more than happy to talk to you about what we can do to see if we can accommodate you, if not on part of it, then somewhere else as we bring that plan forward. I think just as a broader level, one of the things I've picked up is an expectation, you know, from you guys, from business, and certainly from government, that if we have plans, and if we had plans where we are the landowner, that we absolutely, you know, get on with it, that we accelerate those plans wherever possible. So I'm sure you'll understand, Mick, why we want to bring Decoy Farm forward. And, you know, our economic analysts tell me that there is still that pent-up demand, and it's really important to be ready, you know, for when people want to build. So let's talk about that one, you know, outside of the webinar.
Thanks, Martin. Right, next question from Robert Wilson and James Gibbons from the Worthing Dome. A long question with some suggestions, and it's not an uncommon question. Basically, as an owner of a local hospitality business for the last 10 years, and having operated in the sector regionally for nearly 30 years, this is the most difficult time. The industry was shut down first due to the current physical distancing advice, will inevitably be the last to recover. And then some detailed questions about how the hospitality sector can get further help. I can't promise you anything on this, but this is probably the most common issue that has come up with Treasury ministers from other MPs, because the hospitality industry is obviously a big employer. It's a disproportionately large employer on the Sussex coast, as we know, and the knock-on impact on the supply chain is considerable as well. What I do support, and I put the letter on my website, and I know Andy Sparse has distributed amongst some businesses recently as well, is about 140 MPs wrote to Rishi Sunak earlier this month, specifically on the tourism and hospitality sector, asking for consideration of, amongst other things, the following: to extend the business rate relief threshold up to 150,000, extend the furlough period beyond the end of lockdown, because obviously the hospitality industry is a seasonal thing, and it will miss out on some of the benefits of furloughing if it does get curtailed sooner rather than later. Make the furlough scheme more flexible, reduce the rate of VAT on tourism. Now, that's something that's not just new to coronavirus, but something many of us have been suggesting for a while, reducing that down to 5%, and various other measures as well. Now, those considerations are being looked at by the Treasury, and there'll be a lot of pressure on that, and it does involve an awful lot of people, and actually the cost proportionately is not that high dealing with some of the sorts of jobs that we are dealing with. So yes, there's considerable pressure to do something about that. Two other things, and there's a question popped up as well about there are certain businesses that loosely come under hospitality and leisure that fell between various stools in the business grant scheme. And Martin and Andy Winters at the council were really helpful in taking the default position that they would try and include them unless they absolutely couldn't. And I think we squeezed a few people in under the wire. So we had suppliers to the hospitality industry who were making pies. Piglet's Pantry was as Chamber member was a case in point, and I took it all the way up to the Paymaster General as a good example of a company that wasn't in the hospitality industry, but they supplied 100% of their goods effectively to the hospitality industry, and their customers had gone. Now, the various measures were made available to some of those companies. The discretionary grant, which has now come in, is absolutely for some of those sorts of companies who just didn't get within the definition. So hopefully if there's still some outstanding, then Martin, when they bring in those definitions, will be able to include many of those. And then final point on this, there've been a series of webinars around the tourism sector for Sussex, and I was part of the one last week, which was really interesting, with a wide range of providers from hoteliers to vineyard owners across the sector, about how we can really push the domestic tourism industry, working together, building a brand for Sussex tourism or whatever, to try and accelerate that bounce back. Now, it could go one of two ways here. If we are going to see restrictions on foreign travel, which we are to a large extent, then does that mean we can get more people coming down to Sussex to boost the domestic tourism industry? But then that depends on how social distancing and all the other regulations are going to be relaxed over the summer period or not. So a lot is contingent on that. But if we possibly can, then obviously you want to make it easier for people to get back using the hospitality industry. It looks as though there are going to be plans for opening up pubs from the beginning of July and other hospitality venues. But again, people are going to have to adapt. It's going to be easier for those premises that have got beer gardens, for example. I certainly will be in favour that we open up some of those places earlier if they can easily show where they can spread people out outside. But then there's going to be a disproportionate effect for those who've got small indoor premises as well. So it may mean a phased opening as well. All these things are being looked at, but there's a real urgency within the hospitality industry to get as much up and running before summer proper as possible, and I absolutely support that. Martin, you want to come in on this?
Yeah, just a brief supplementary, Tim. Government issued some very helpful guidance last Wednesday, picking up on the notion of safe town with safe spaces, and it includes things like parks and open spaces, but also our town and village centres. So we've really sort of picked up the baton on that, and we're working with our neighbours, but also the coastal capital LEP, and really to sort of drive forward some practical measures which, when the time is right, will make it easier for people to come back into those areas of our places, so that their whole experience, if they are able to enjoy the hospitality sector, as Tim indicates, more so as we all wish, in the coming months, that actually their experience of coming to our places, right from the point of whether it's parking the car or arriving by public transport or walking or cycling, through to getting to where they want to go, and then enjoying public space in an appropriate way before they return safely, It's a package, if you like, and that's certainly what the government seems keen to promote. So we've actually had officers out with our colleagues in West Sussex, looking at our streets in our central areas, looking at pinch points, looking at areas where we might have to stencil to put signing up, and we're going to be discussing that with our local retailers just to make sure that we're doing things that work for them too.
Martin, let's bring in, there's a few other questions that come up on the Q&A box as well related to this. Simon Pilbeam mentioning about flexibility over 2 meters apart. Again, I think that will come in other countries. Apparently it's 1.5 meters or a meter as well. I mean, we just got to get to a stage where people use common sense. And that was what, although there was some confusion at the time, and that last announcement by the Prime Minister where staying at home the whole time is not necessarily now the imperative. But it's about, okay, people can go out, but for goodness sake, use some common sense rather than have to look at the rule book the whole time as to what you can do or not. And it looks as though the virus within the community is largely under control now in most parts of the country. So Simon's also raised a question about should there be more flexible restrictions in certain parts of the country. In West Sussex, for example, the level of infection and deaths is actually below the average for some reason. We seem to be doing quite well here. Hampshire to the west is a bit of a hotspot for some reason. So Simon's asking, would it not be sensible to reduce restrictions in Sussex? That would be nice, but then everybody from Hampshire will come across the border to West Sussex. And we've, one of the implications of the relaxation of restrictions is it's harder to deter people who were coming down for day trips from London to Brighton or bringing down their camper vans and things like that, which is not what we want at this stage. And we just need people to act responsibly. The problem with the lockdown, it was always going to be, and we can criticise, did the lockdown come too early, too late, or whatever? It's a question of having a lockdown, but also a lockdown which people would observe and go along with. And the longer it goes on, as we see, then the more impatient people are becoming and the more they are flexing the rules. And that's always going to be the problem. And what we don't want is to see that second spike, where there's some evidence in some other countries where actually rates have started to trickle back up again. I mean, one thing I was talking to a couple of members about recently, somebody, I won't mention who, said, why don't we have a big marquee in Steen Gardens and then various restaurants and hotels or whatever could have areas of it all suitably distanced to be able to offer their menus. Lovely idea, but actually that's attracting a whole load of people into a concentrated area. However, when you try and social distance, how do you work the queues for the loos, the queues for the buffet or whatever? It's fraught with problems. However, we have got large spaces in Worthing that perhaps with a bit of creative thinking, and I'm sure the council is looking at this sort of thing, could we use our beaches? Could there be pop-up restaurants in a section of a beach where people effectively go and get a sort of takeaway and then go and eat suitably socially distanced on the beach? So these sorts of things, I think, if they can be done in a sensible way and practically with the endorsement of the council, are creative ways where we can start to open up some of the hospitality sector safely before it might have been done otherwise. I mean, just a few ideas tossed around like that. Martin, you come back and then we'll go to the next question.
Yeah, sure. Very, very briefly, Tim. I think that's, ideas like that are absolutely terrific. And I think there's a real onus on the local authorities to apply sensible regulation. This is an unprecedented situation. So actually, some of our sort of, normal work, goes out the window when we're accommodating something like, sort of beach pop-up restaurants idea, or indeed some of our retailers using some of their external space in an appropriate way. So, yeah, I think we should be really supportive of it and obviously use our regulatory powers wisely.
Just looking at the questions again, somebody's asking about the numbers of people in Worthing who've tested positive and how many fatalities. I don't have the full figures. I do know the number of fatalities we've had across the Western Sussex Hospitals Trust, which is not for public consumption, but just to say it is relatively low. And when I last spoke to the hospital last week, there were fewer than a handful of people in intensive care beds with COVID, and the number of people infected with COVID in hospital had effectively been more than halving each week. So they're now redesignating parts of Worthing Hospital back to normal service. And a really important issue is about the big reduction in the number of people going to A&E. We are 50% down on what they would normally expect, and the ambulance service is substantially less busy as well. And there's a real need for people who would normally go to A&E, they need to go to A&E. There's all sorts of stories about people having mild heart attacks or mild strokes, not wanting to travel with the NHS because of all the pressure they're under, or not wanting to go to Worthing Hospital because they might get an infection. They are only storing up trouble for later, and the big fear is that people are actually going to present later on with much greater damage than if they'd gone earlier in the first place. Worthing Hospital has been divided into a green zone and a red zone, and it's perfectly safe in the green zone, no cross infection with COVID at all. And just remember that one of the reasons that Worthing is the most outstanding hospital in the country is its relentless driving down of its hospital-acquired infection rate by, I think, about 90%. So actually, they've been on that case for a long, long time. So just to encourage people, they need to go and use hospital services wherever possible. There are 3 areas which the hospital are opening up from next week. Firstly, cancer services will be a priority. Secondly, important diagnostics, which have been delayed. And thirdly, those people with elective surgery, which has been delayed disproportionately. Those are the priorities the hospitals are opening up on starting this week effectively. Okay, next question we got from Daniel Grover at Nordell. Yesterday, Made in Britain campaign released the following news. Made in Britain is getting several requests from media for access to its members. TV crews want to film in factories and journalists. If you have a strong belief in British manufacturing, opinions on the way industry could be run, ideas on how the government can help, etc., etc., we want to hear from you. So what Daniel's saying is the COVID pandemic has highlighted the UK's exposure to wider global sourcing and put further emphasis on home production. And the UK's manufacturing sector needs to build skills and capacity and is made up of many SMEs. And it goes on. Really important point. I think if there's one thing that has come out loud and clear from this pandemic is how we need to have greater security of our supply chain across the piece and be able to produce more things in the UK. Now, there are perfectly good reasons why over many years, globalization, we get so much of our stuff from China. That's just not going to happen in the future. And our whole relationship with Chinese trade, I think, is going to come under huge scrutiny in the future. And I've got a discussion with the Chancellor later today where we are already looking at post-coronavirus recovery ideas. And one of the things I'm very keen on is if you look at the response by certain businesses during the crisis to adapt their production lines to produce PPE equipment. So we had the classic example of Parafix on Lancing Business Park, who rang me up and said, we think we can produce 120,000 protective visors. How do we go about it? Who do we get in contact with? We set all that up. They produced 127,000 protective visors in the space of 8 days. Really, really important and timely bit of kit. What that shows is we've got a number of manufacturing production lines that are quite versatile. What's going to come out of all this, sadly, is that many jobs will be lost, and many jobs which are currently furloughed are jobs which have effectively will not be there in due course. It's a question of how many of those jobs we can keep going. And then what the government needs to do as we come out of coronavirus to give continuing help to keep those businesses alive and running, either to carry on with their businesses before, it may be on a reduced scale, or in some cases to be able to adapt to new markets and new products. And within this as well, I think one of the big things is going to be environmental issues and going green. and can we get out of this a sort of second industrial revolution that that the government is able to provide grants and finance tax incentives for those businesses who might otherwise go under to be able to survive and adapt their production lines with environmental criteria and others to go with it. So all these sorts of things are being looked at. And I think there's a new awareness of, well, if you want to see a flourishing manufacturing industry in the UK, then we need to buy British at every level as well. And it may mean it's a bit more expensive, but if it means security of jobs and the money going back into the economy, then that's a fair balance to achieve. So all these sorts of things are going to be coming out of the melting pot as we start to plan for a post-coronavirus economy over coming weeks and months. Martin, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point, Tim, and I think, you know, many economic analysts are sort of pointing to the fact that business and indeed public agencies are going to be subject, you know, quite rightly so, to much more sort of scrutiny, you know, as we go forward in terms of, you know, things like sort of their green credentials, their supply chain sourcing. And I think one of the impacts of the pandemic has actually been to sort of heighten and lift that sense of expectation. You know, as you rightly say, you know, we will all need to respond. I think one of the sort of delightful aspects, if you like, is that, you know, we've seen businesses responding in the way that Parafix and Ricardo have, you know, joyfully, and I know there are many others, and that's really resonated with people locally, and also people, you know, sourcing, you know, just in terms of consumer behaviours, people sourcing local products has been a real revelation for some folk, and, you know, one would hope that would stick as we go forward from now.
John Rush from HR Smart is asking, would Worthing Council be open to investing in a state-of-the-art loyalty card scheme to try and get the local community buying local, which is sort of linked into this. And I'm working with one Worthing Facebook page, which is trying to open up a much more sophisticated website, which would promote Worthing businesses, particularly for families to use as well, which I think is a really interesting idea as part of the coronavirus recovery, how we can get people to support local businesses. And as part of that, you know, those businesses who have gone that extra mile during the crisis, who've gone out and reached their customers, who've donated things, whatever, those need to be the ones I think a lot of people will want to support first and foremost as well. So, Martin, are there any plans of what the council may be doing to try and promote sort of corporate loyalty schemes and promoting Worthing business generally?
Yeah, just on that specific question, Tim. Firstly, yeah, I think that's a terrific idea. Be very happy for my team back at the council to be, you know, involved in that and to help, you know, where we can in terms of sort of, you know, the resource and administration that's required to get these things going sometimes. So yeah, more than helpful, more than happy rather to say, you know, that we'll take that on board. So, you know, please do get in contact and we'll support. I think, you know, more broadly, there's a piece around procurement. We often talk about procurement. The council attempts to do its very best as far as sort of local procurement is concerned. And then sometimes, you know, we fall foul of sort of national and indeed international procurement rules and regulations. The message from government seems to me to be abundantly clear. You know, make it work at a local level, and actually in terms of some of the things that we're going to need to do to promote recovery, you know, we've actually got to challenge, you know, some of what has been the sort of prevailing regulatory framework head on. I'll give you, you know, one small example. I'll just put it out there. You know, we're preparing a plan, and we're very, you know, happy to share the sort of details of that around how people can move safely in our buildings. Obviously including our staff, but also, you know, customers when they come to the building. So where do we source Perspex screens from, for example, is, you know, a conversation we were having only yesterday in the council. Now, I'm expecting lots of offers at this point, by the way, everybody. You know, if we can't find a local business for Perspex screens, or we go through some sort of, you know, national procurement rigmarole and end up, you know, importing them, I think that's an absolute nonsense. So, you know, it's one small example, but I think, you know, perhaps illustrative of the new territory that we have got to move into as a public agency.
A couple of quick ones. Heidi's asking, are the farmer and artisan markets being reopened? Martin, I guess that would depend on how quickly the hospitality industry comes back in from July the 1st. So you're waiting on guidance for the government on that. Would that be right?
We absolutely are. But Tim, what I can say is that we've been in touch with all of the traders just to sort of test the water and see what their appetite is for coming back. Obviously, it won't look and feel like the markets that you know, we've had up until this point. But I'm very pleased with the response that we've received. You know, traders are perhaps understandably, you know, very keen, and also understanding of the fact that it would be, you know, a different format. But if we can bring, you know, some of our traders back, you know, in June, July time, we would love to do that. So yes is the answer. It's about working out the mechanics so people feel safe and reassured, both traders and customers alike.
I'm sure on Farmers Market, which is the best farmers market in the world, of course, is always absolutely crowded. So how you're going to try and keep people apart there is going to be a real challenge. But, you know, do you expand it? Do we have it in the churchyard in Shoreham or something like that, and spread it out there? There are ways of looking at this. Peter Gilmartin, no, sorry, Dean Harding, we've done that one, asking Martin, you mentioned the discretionary fund will be rolled out in mid-June. Are you able to let businesses know that prior to that date, so that they'll be eligible, whether they'll be eligible to give peace of, so they'll be eligible to give peace of mind? So basically, I think he's asking, can you give an indication of whether they're in the running or not before you actually properly start?
Yeah, it's a very good, and you know, Dean, it's a good example, I suppose, of, you know, of a business which, you know, came outside of the criteria for the, you know, the initial round of grant funding. So, as I said, we're working through that at the moment, putting our guidance together. And yes, you know, we will give you an indication of whether you're likely to qualify as soon as we know, because you know, I know how important this is to you.
Some blatant advertising here. Kelly Hare suggesting you can get your Perspex screens from Mark Owen at Mocha Furniture. Right, I've got a question from Brian Boggis that came in earlier from AAC Southern Limited, also I think he was a councillor. Brian's got 4 employees currently on furlough as he can't carry on with the air conditioning service work in restaurants and schools and other premises. There are opportunities arising for a partial return, enabling 1 or 2 technicians to return for perhaps 2 days a week. Can the furloughing arrangements be made more flexible? Well, the extension to the furloughing scheme, which was announced last week, Brian, does bring in a much greater degree of flexibility, but not until August the 1st, and then you will be able to do it for shorter times, bring people in and out as well. I appreciate that is 2 months away. If people are coming back to work at a greater rate than anticipated, then there may be more pressure to have greater flexibility within that. I will mention that one, the conversations with the Chancellor, and given that a lot of the measures that have been announced, there have been adaptations and tweaking of them over the last few weeks. I think it's possible that something could be done there. But as it stands at the moment, the current 3-week considerations remain in force until the 1st of August and the new scheme then. But at least it's being carried on beyond the initial June cut-off date. Right, I have got Bev Lees from Allergy Therapeutics. Is Tim aware of any development on Brexit trade talks? Back to Brexit. Besides the disagreement on fishing waters, has any progress been made with respect to harmonisation of pharmaceuticals between the UK and Europe? And does Ms. Loughton anticipate an extension request at the end of June due to COVID-19? Bev, the simple answer to that is no, there have been no announcements. Basically, it's it's still an all or nothing negotiation that's going on at the moment. There aren't plans to sort of trot out incrementally various things that have been agreed. An awful lot has been agreed in advance of the whole Brexit bill going through Parliament anyway. The focus has obviously been on fishing, and there's clear indications that actually when European ministers get involved in this, they are going to have to certainly relax their fishing requirements, which were completely unrealistic. And all we're asking for is a similar annual quota arrangement as the EU has with Norway at the moment. So we're not asking for something outrageous. You would have seen that letter to Barnier from the UK's Brexit negotiator, which was quite a full and frank exchange of views, I thought. So the plans at the moment are those negotiations are ongoing. The government has said quite forcibly that they do not intend to apply for an extension, and we've actually legislated that the transition period will come to an end at the end of December. It is very much still the government's intention, and if that were to change, we have to notify by July, and that would also require legislation effectively to say now the government could do that. So I still think that is highly unlikely. But has there been any specific announcements regarding drug harmonisation? And the simple answer is no, and there hasn't with a whole load of areas at the moment either. Right. Mr. Loughton, Darren Gearing, can you share any news or initiatives you might be supporting regarding mandating and pressurising the insurance industry on their current reluctance to pay anything on their business interruption insurance? I know this is a real problem, and I think the insurance industry has paid out something like 900 million, but that is on business interruption, but that is a very small part of the cover for business interruption insurance that many firms thought they had, but have not proved watertight in the eyes of the insurance companies under coronavirus. Now, I've just had a letter this morning from Mel Stride, who's the chairman of the Treasury Select Committee, and they have had the FCA, the Ombudsman, the insurance industry in front of them pressing this whole case. What I will do, I'll publish that letter on my website later today under business support, so you can see what he's saying as to how further pressure is being put on the insurance industry to stump up in some of these cases. I've had a number of queries. Some of our employers do seem to be insured by some very dodgy outfits, I have to say, in a few cases, including quite a few overseas insurance companies that are not bound by the usual regulations for the FCA and financial conduct regulations in the UK, which is part of the problem as well. But I'm happy to put that letter on my website, and you can see what's actually being said by the Treasury Select Committee. Right, Martin, over to you as I go through the questions, because they're coming in thick and fast now. Go on. Yeah,
there was one I was just going to pick up on, if that's okay, around bike lanes and opening up.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Areas. Thank you. So this is coming from
Andy Sparsis.
Yeah. And Andy, I think it's a really good point. So we are currently talking with our colleagues in West Sussex about additional bike lanes on a temporary basis, both in Ada and in Worthing. At our forthcoming Joint Strategic Committee, we've got something called our LC WHIP. Sounds a little odd, don't ask me what it stands for. It's local cycling and walking something or other. But we've taken some of the routes from that and said to our colleagues at West Sussex, let's see if we can do something which doesn't disrupt on-street parking, but actually makes the position more helpful for our cyclists. So we have that in play at the moment, and we're looking to bring those forward. The other aspect is, as you know only too well, Andy, you know, there are a number of public realm schemes who have been fighting hard for the sort of financial support over a period. The suggestion has come forward, and I would really welcome views that, you know, we introduce some temporary public realm improvements in the spirit of, say, something like Portland Road, we actually gate it off prior to the formal building work, which won't begin until sort of probably early next year. So if that's helpful for businesses, and I've asked Andy and Fiona in my team to sort of canvass views, then we will do it using the sort of temporary powers that are available to us.
Thanks, Martin. A couple of other quick ones, and then I'll go back to the pre-prepared questions. Trevor, we're asking regarding bounce back loans. We don't need it now, but could if the situation continues for longer than 2 to 3 months. In your opinion, could the fund run out? The answer is no. It's open-ended. The Chancellor said that he will continue these schemes as long as we possibly can, as long as they are needed. So it's not a finite pot in that respect, and they have proved exceedingly effective. Particularly because of the really quick turnaround time and how easy it is just to apply online. And then one from Richard Hopkins to Tim and Martin. The NFU and Horticultural Trade Association are lobbying DEFRA for an extended CBILS term, as many horticulture and agricultural businesses would not be able to support a quicker payback. Horticulture and agriculture are well placed as enduring industries, surviving many generations, so the risk of underwriting a 10-year loan is low. Can you support this endeavour? Yes, I do. That's been raised with the Chancellor. There was a lot of pressure on the government about nurseries and garden centres. It did seem to me not logical that you can go to B&Q and buy your plants when they opened up again. In fact, they never had to close. They chose to close their branches because they're classified as an ironmonger. They were actually able to stay open, and they now are. And yet you couldn't go to nurseries and garden centres where there's plenty of space. And in fact, I nipped my one last week, and it was perfectly good system of you queued up 2 meters apart, and there's a one-way system, absolutely fine. And absolutely, they took a hit, the worst time of year for them. And those that have taken a loan, there's pressure for them to be able to do it over a longer period of time. And a lot of people have been supporting that. I certainly would support that. I hope that's the sort of thing that the government can respond to. And again, it's not a hugely expensive thing to do. It just needs a bit more flexibility. Right. I've got Debbie Ross asking about aviation. So aviation has been hit particularly hard during the COVID pandemic. And this in turn will affect a large number of local constituents who work or are associated and rely on this industry. And the knock-on effect to the local economy will be devastating. And particularly asking about BA's attitude. Okay, so again, we've made representations to the government on the Gatwick effect in particular. I had a call with Kelly Tolhurst, the aviation minister, at the end of last month. I've also made representations on behalf of Shoreham Airport as well, because Shoreham has obviously been hit, and although recreational flying has been opened up in the last few days for one man or one woman aircraft, that doesn't include training yet, because it's difficult to go up training single-handedly. Of course, Shoreham is one of the biggest airports for training. I think something like 6% of pilot licenses a year or two ago came through Shoreham. So that's still not allowed, but the government is working on ways to see how we can open that up. Grant Shapps, the Secretary of State for Transport, is a keen pilot himself, so there's an area he appreciates. As regards Gatwick, this is a huge hit on the regional economy. It's the biggest business rate payer in Sussex. The economy of Crawley is hugely dependent on Gatwick for taxes, for employment, and the service industry. And that extends throughout the whole of Sussex. We know a lot of my constituents work at Gatwick or work in jobs that supply Gatwick. And I've been surprised just how many employees, particularly of BA, we have working down here, as well as Virgin as well. So I've had a lot of emails from BA employees. And I do think British Airways have behaved particularly disgracefully in this, because they've only announced these proposed redundancies for BA, but nothing equivalent for Aer Lingus, for Iberia, and the other airline brands within the IAG group. So I think there's a good deal of politicking going on here as well. Virgin obviously has been getting rather less sympathy, and I've had fewer correspondence about Virgin, but the government is looking at what we may have to do specifically to help the aviation industry. They obviously qualify for furloughing schemes and various other business support schemes, but they have taken a disproportionate hit, as we know. And although some of the airlines have said that they're going to start opening up flights in the near future, that's going to be dependent on what the government does come up with as to what sort of checks we're going to have when people arrive. And that is still under active discussion. Personally, I think it's completely unrealistic. Anybody coming to this country has to quarantine for 2 weeks. It's just not going to happen. So we need to have various sort of air bridges, as being discussed, between various controlled countries. We may have more sophisticated heat-sensitive monitoring schemes for people coming through. The trouble is they're not hugely effective, which is why they weren't introduced in the first place. And all sorts of things are going to have to be looked at. But a blanket 2-week quarantine is effectively just going to kill the whole business, and business travel will certainly end, and people are not going to go on holiday if they then spend 2 weeks on holiday in quarantine and come back another 2 weeks in quarantine here. It's just impractical. So it's a really problematic one, and there's lots of serious work has to be done as to see what we can open up or not. But yes, you're right, Debbie. It's going to have a big hit on the Sussex economy. Martin, anything you want to add on that?
No, other than obviously you're absolutely right, Tim. In terms of the sort of how far that spreads, and we're very conscious that we have a number of businesses that supply the aviation industry, so there may not be the direct aviators, as it were, but they supply a lot of the kit, and they do the laundry and other aspects. So this is felt across our patch, as you rightly say.
I've got it. We answered the one from Richard Hopkins in advance. Ginny Santa from Monetaire would like to know whether there's any hope for the thousands of company directors who are paid on annual schemes but can't claim CGRS because their remuneration was reported after the 19th of March, but have had many years of being paid in this way. Again, that's something that representation will be made to the government. If you remember, the cut-off date was changed from February because a lot of people missed out, and we had a lot of people who were between jobs and everything as well, and it wasn't realistic for them to go back to their previous employer to ask if they could be furloughed or whatever. As the Chancellor said, there's no way he can please everybody and take in every job in every business. I think it's pretty impressive the amount of businesses and employees who have benefited from one scheme or the other. But as I say, I don't know how likely it is, but various adjustments are being made all the time, as there are sort of unintended consequences and groups of people who emerge who appear to fall between all those stools, which is why I think it's a really good move that we've got that discretionary fund now, so that local authorities who know best about the circumstances of local businesses can be much more flexible in how they apply some of those grants, where you're making grants in this case. And I just think in future, as we come out of coronavirus, that makes a stronger case for giving greater autonomy to local authorities to be able to influence and engage in the local economies as well. We are going to, Andrew Swain has asked, what does the new normal look like? That's the big debate. I mean, things are never going to be the same again. We have discovered in a hurry and under force majeure that actually a lot more people can work from home. And so when we have got through all of this, how many people are going to be back to a 9 to 5, 5 days a week office environment on a crowded 742 from Shoreham to London Bridge or whatever? I think people are going to be changing their work patterns as well. So what the new normal is I think going to look quite different. What that's going to look like, then that's up for discussion over coming months, and we just need to be flexible enough, and business needs to be given that flexibility and practical support to make sure it can keep up with those new economic circumstances.
I think it's really interesting, and it's certainly, you know, our experience. Force majeure, as it were, is absolutely our experience. You know, and it's amazing what you can do. You know, when you've only got 24 or 48 hours to do it. But certainly, you know, when after the Prime Minister's announcement last Sunday week, we looked very carefully at the numbers of people that needed to go back into our office space, who weren't at work already, doing things like, you know, collecting the rubbish and recycling, or out and about in our parks. And the answer, which won't surprise you, was actually there wasn't anyone else who needed to be, you know, in an office. We needed to make sure we were there to serve our customers, but we already had those folk in play.
Just going back to the travel one, Lawrence Boone from Fizz is asking, are we going to restrict travel to and from some countries, for the USA, for example, who banned us and are in a far worse situation than us? Then I think practically that's what we're going to have to do. I mean, it's quite difficult to say that people from a country which has had a far lower infection rate from us, and where they appear to have it under far greater control, that those people couldn't come to the UK, or we couldn't go to those countries. You know, if I were Greece, for example, where incredibly the infection rate has been very low, is it safer for people to go to Greece than stay in the UK? And I would be more concerned if I were the Greek government in allowing people in from the UK than vice versa, just statistically. So this is a huge problem as to how we're going to open up travel again, and it's not going to be an easy question, but we're going to need to look at variable treatments, I think, of various different countries and forms of transport as well. If we're all going to be travelling on planes with perspex screens between the seats and all having to wear masks, I guess that means an end to in-flight catering anyway, because you can't eat that through a mask. But anyway, all these things are.
Well, there's always some good news.
This is some good news, yeah, absolutely. Right, we're in the last 5 minutes. I've gone through all these pre-submitted questions, except for Andrew Swain, who submitted a thesis covering just about every subject going. If I just pick up on one of those, road networks and cycle lanes, you've touched on that already, Martin. I've been getting quite a few representations from people saying, can we see some pop-up cycle lanes on the Old Shoreham Road, for example, to extend into Brighton and Hove, where they have been swifter in setting up pop-up cycle lanes. Obviously, they've got a bigger network of it already in the city. And I know Kevin Boreham, who is the sort of cycling champion for the County Council, has been working on a cycling plan anyway, and is putting pressure on the County Council to get its act together on this. The other thing, interestingly, which sort of went largely unnoticed, is the government has brought forward the pilots for e-scooters. Yeah. And I mean, I'm a big fan of e-scooters. I think they need to be properly regulated, but if you go to any major European city, I was in Barcelona, in fact I was in Tel Aviv last year, and e-scooters were all over the place. They're as common as Boris bikes, and there are e-scooter rental schemes and everything like that. So I think it's going to come. We need to do it in an ordered way so that it's safe. The suggestion is that they would be limited to 12 miles an hour to be comparable to bikes who aren't whizzing along the cycle lane on the seafront, and that they wouldn't be on pavements, they'd be on road cycle lanes, and others may need to require insurance and things like that. That is a small part, but is a part of the sort of new travel outlook. And if there's a lot of money that government's put into encouraging cycling and alternative ways of getting to work, we've got to find a way of making those sustainable and permanent in the future as well. So what works the local councils doing on that in unison with the county, Martin?
Yes, I think it's a really good point, Tim. As I said earlier, you know, we've prepared our local cycling and walking plan, and we've taken some segments from that and we've submitted them to West Sussex as the Highway Authority. One of them, you're absolutely right, is the A270, and wouldn't it be fantastic if we could match up? The Brighton and Hove scheme actually stops at Hangleton, but it's not far from there to Southern Cross, and then of course you're over the border into our patch, and you could envisage a very significant cycleway which covers an area where there isn't on-street parking, which is often the complication. So we've prepared that, we've submitted it, and again you're right, Councillor Boreham, and also Brian Boggess is on this call. We had a discussion last night with the leader of the council, Neil Parkin, and there's strong support. So we're pushing all the way for it, and hope to have some news soon.
Andrew Spade's also asked about education. Obviously, the topic of the moment is are schools going to be opening up further on June the 1st? I've taken quite a firm line on this, and I've written a long letter which I posted on Facebook, which has instigated quite a lot of discussion amongst parents and teachers. I think we have to open up our schools as much as possible, as soon as possible. For young kids who are missing out on school, and effectively if they don't go back before the summer holidays, they will have missed out on 6 months of the school year. 2 months is 1% of a child's childhood, and if you are a primary school child, that is a particularly important time for that child's learning. And it's not just academic learning, it's also personal and emotional development at school as well. And if they're kept away from their mates and from their classmates, that can have a big impact on those children as well. So I think that the default position should be, how can we get as many of those kids back to school as quickly as possible safely? Schools have not closed. Some schools have closed because they just didn't have numbers of key workers or vulnerable children going to them. But most schools have remained open. Teachers have been going in, and teachers have been doing virtual lessons over the internet as well. So it's a question of, how do we now accommodate a growing number of children coming back on a phased basis? And I think the approach for the National Education Union and the letter they sent to all their members, effectively instructing them not to engage in any planning arrangements, was really unfortunate. I mean, there are ways that we can do this. For certain schools where they've got space problems, it's going to be more challenging, more problematic. But we've got a load of empty buildings at the moment. We've got council buildings, we've got church halls, we've got parish halls, we've got restaurants, we've got cinemas, we've got theatres that are not being used at the moment. So a bit of creative thinking as to how, if we need more space, we can spill over into some of those sorts of space, how we can do phased starting times, how we can do rota systems for lunches, or all have to bring packed lunches or provide packed lunches, and whether we should be using the summer holidays for summer schools or whatever. I just think we desperately need to look at how we can do it, rather than a bit of a computer says no mentality. It's good for the kids. 90% of vulnerable kids who would normally be able to go to school are not, and are staying at home, and those are the kids that we are most worried about, who are most at risk, most likely to fall behind, and are least likely to be getting good alternative education in a home environment as well. And a lot of their parents need to be able to get back to work. So I hope the government is going to be firm on this. West Sussex is certainly cooperating and encouraging schools to go back wherever possible. A few councils have taken the view they're not. I just think that's unhelpful. There'll be some schools it can't happen. There'll be some schools we'll have to do reduced numbers. That flexibility is there for schools to be able to do it in the safest way they think they can. But for goodness sake, let's have a bit more of a can-do attitude. That's my sermon, and it's 11 o'clock. Martin, do you want to round up on anything else, and then we'll hand back to Chay to finish up?
Okay, thanks. Other than to say, really got to take the questions. There are a few there that we'll try and pick up on, outside of the meeting. But just to thank everybody for participating, and fantastic to hear from you. And best wishes to everybody.
Indeed. Thank you, Tim and Martin. I think everyone's really interacted well in this. There's been about 25 questions put through the Q&A section. I thank you both for your honesty and openness. I think it's clear that everyone's working really well, or as best they can at the moment, adapting and working with each other and changing as we can. Tim, you mentioned loosely your website. I know you're working very hard on keeping that up to date and relevant. I know ours is at the Chamber as well, and Martin's, yours at the Council, of course, as well. There's a lot of up to date and relevant information there in this ever-changing times. So as you say, I wish everyone out there the best. Hope to see you soon. I'm sure we will try and put on another one of these in a month or so. In the meantime, everyone, take care. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jay.